Okay, so get ready because today we're going deep, really deep, into the world of, well, ancient forbidden teachings, secret societies.
Psychic spies.
Yeah, you got it. We're taking a deep dive into those what a faultist videos, the ones you've been watching on
Yeah,
YouTube.
those ones.
It's quite a journey through history, philosophy, all those ways humans try to make sense of, like consciousness and reality.
It's a fascinating area.
Definitely. And you got to have a guide for this kind of exploration, right? Someone who can, unpack some of these mind-bending concepts.
Well, luckily, we've got an expert right here ready to dive in.
I'm ready. Let's do it.
From, like, the CIA's adventures in the spirit world to the secrets of alchemy, we're covering it all.
We're going deep.
Deep dive, right. So the first thing that really struck me about these videos was this kind of contrast they highlight. I mean, we live in this incredibly materialistic world, right?
Totally.
Obsessed with what we can touch, measure.
Quantify everything. Exactly. But then at the same time, we're just fascinated by the stuff we can't quite pin down, like consciousness, for example.
Yeah, it's a big mystery.
Huge mystery. It's like that old saying, right? If you can't see it, does it even exist?
Well,
Have we, maybe, and this is just me thinking out loud here, have we gone too far in dismissing the power of what we can't actually, like, physically examine?
it's a good question. It reminds me of that whole hard problem of consciousness.
Oh, yeah.
Philosophers, scientists, they've been wrestling with that one for centuries.
How do you explain something subjective, something you experience, but, you can't just hold it in your hand?
It's a tough one. Some philosophers, they say that consciousness is like this fundamental property of the universe.
Right.
Like gravity, electromagnetism.
It's just there.
Yeah, just part of the fabric of reality.
Interesting.
Others think it emerges from the complexity of the brain. But even then, they have a hard time explaining exactly how that works.
Right.
And then there's this whole other idea that maybe, just maybe, our thoughts, our beliefs actually influence reality more than we realize.
Okay, now we're getting somewhere.
Right.
I mean, have you ever noticed how, like, a bad mood can seem to, I don't know, attract bad luck?
I've had those days.
Or how just, like, shifting your perspective on a situation can totally change how it plays out?
Absolutely. Your attitude makes a huge difference.
It's like the videos say, change your mind, change your life.
I like that.
It got me thinking about those stories you hear, about people who just completely turn their lives around, right?
Yeah.
And it's not like their external circumstances change that much. Same job, same city, whatever.
Right.
But suddenly, everything's different just because their outlook shifted.
Powerful stuff.
It's a powerful reminder that the world, what we perceive as the world, it's as much a reflection of our inner world as it is of all that external stuff, right?
Totally.
And here's where it gets really wild.
Okay, hit me.
The video, it goes into the CIA's exploration of the spirit world.
Wait, what?
No, seriously.
The CIA.
And it wasn't just like some, fringe project.
Okay.
They were taking it seriously, apparently.
Wow.
We're talking scientists, military personnel, not just, your average...
Crystal ball gazers?
Exactly. And they were finding, get this, evidence that accessing other realms of existence might actually be possible.
No way.
I know, right? The fact that the government poured resources into this kind of research, it's pretty mind-blowing, don't you think? Makes you wonder what else might be out there beyond our current, limited understanding.
Totally agree. It makes you think. And it wasn't just the Americans, by the way.
Oh,
The Soviets were doing similar research, too.
no kidding. A psychic arms race.
Apparently. It seems like both sides of the Cold War were pretty interested in exploring the unseen world.
It makes you wonder, what if there is something to these ancient beliefs about a spirit world? A world that exists beyond our five senses? I mean, it's a perspective that was totally commonplace throughout most of human history. Even, like, big thinkers, Isaac Newton, Charles Darwin, they were open to it.
It's true, there were.
So here we are, this materialistic society, grappling with these huge mysteries like consciousness. And maybe, just maybe, there's something to these age-old ideas about a world beyond our own.
It's a fascinating possibility, isn't it? And that idea of a world beyond our own, well, it leads us to another fascinating thread in these videos. The whole secret societies thing.
Oh, yeah, like something straight out of the Da Vinci Code. Hidden groups pulling the strings of history, right?
Exactly.
Knowing stuff the rest of us are totally clueless about.
And the videos, they point to groups like the Freemasons.
Right.
I mean, they existed, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah, they were a big deal.
They had some serious influence. especially back in the Enlightenment.
Shaping revolutions and whatnot.
Exactly. The American Revolution, the French Revolution, they were right there in the thick of it.
Wow.
But what's really interesting is this idea that they might just be one example of something much bigger, like this phenomenon that's been going on for centuries.
Okay, so we're talking like shadowy cabals, secret handshakes, controlling everything from behind the scenes.
Not necessarily. But it does make you think, right?
Oh, yeah.
How do these groups form? What are they all about?
What's their deal?
Right. Humans, we're social creatures, right?
Mm.
We crave belonging.
Makes sense.
We want a sense of purpose.
Structure.
And these secret societies, with all their rituals and symbols and shared beliefs,
Yeah.
they offer that, I think, that sense of belonging, of being in the know.
Especially in a world that can feel pretty chaotic and unpredictable.
Exactly. And those myths and symbols they use.
Oh, yeah.
It's like they're not just random stories.
Okay.
It's more like a secret language.
Like a code.
Right. A way for these groups to, like, communicate complex ideas, transmit their worldview across generations.
Hidden in plain sight.
Kind of, yeah.
So you're saying maybe there's more to these stories than meets the eye.
Could be.
But before we get too caught up in this world of secret societies and hidden knowledge and all that, I think it's important to ask, what about the limitations of this kind of thinking?
Oh, that's a good point. A crucial point, actually.
Right.
Exploring these alternative views of reality, sure, it can be eye-opening,
Totally.
but you got to be careful.
How so?
You need that healthy dose of skepticism.
Yeah.
Critical thinking is key here.
Don't check your brain at the door.
Exactly. One thing the video warns about is getting lost in what they call over-specificity.
Over-specificity, that's a mouthful. What's that all about?
Basically, it's the tendency to see meaning in everything,
Okay.
every little detail, even when it might not really be there.
Like reading too much into things?
Yeah, like you see a coincidence, and suddenly it's a sign from the universe.
Oh,
Or you're finding hidden messages in everyday events.
I've been there.
While there might be times when those interpretations are valid, it can be easy to get stuck in that mindset.
Down the rabbit hole.
Totally. And you lose sight of the bigger picture.
So it's all about finding that balance, right?
Exactly.
Being open to different perspectives, but not getting so lost in the details that you lose touch with reality.
100%. And that kind of ties into another potential problem with this kind of thinking.
Which is,
The danger of egotism.
oh, I see where you're going with this.
Historically, this whole idea of having access to esoteric knowledge, it was often used to create hierarchies.
The whole, I've got the secret decoder ring to the universe, so I'm better than you kind of thing.
Exactly. The video even uses the example of the caste system in India,
Right.
which was heavily influenced by these esoteric traditions.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that just because someone claims to have this, special knowledge doesn't automatically make them wiser, more virtuous.
Scoobies makes them louder, maybe.
Right. So yeah, we got to be careful with that.
It's a good reminder that we all have our own paths to knowledge. No one group has a monopoly on truth.
100%.
Uh-huh.
That's why this idea of balance is so important. The video really emphasizes that. It's not about choosing one extreme over the other. It's not materialism versus mysticism, science versus spirituality.
Not a competition.
Right. It's more nuanced than that.
So where does that leave us then?
Well, I think it leaves us with a really interesting question. What if these seemingly opposed ways of understanding the world, what if they're not so different after all?
Okay.
What if they're just different expressions of the same underlying drive?
The drive too.
Understand. And maybe even manipulate reality.
It's an interesting thought. We tend to think in these very binary categories.
Totally.
Science versus religion, logic versus intuition.
Black and white thinking.
But maybe the truth, as they say, lies somewhere in between.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting. Take science, for example. The scientific method itself, which really got going back in the 14th century, it could be seen as like an evolution of earlier alchemical practices, a way of systematizing the pursuit of knowledge, making it more rigorous.
Wait, are you saying that science is just alchemy in disguise?
Not quite. But they both share a common thread, I think. This desire to understand the hidden mechanisms of the universe and to use that knowledge to actually make a difference, to bring about change.
So it's about more than just understanding. It's about applying that understanding.
Exactly.
It's a fascinating way to look at it. And speaking of alchemy...
Alchemy, right. It's not just about turning lead into gold, though I guess that's what most people think of when they hear alchemy.
Yeah, always seemed kind of out there to me. Like, why all the fuss about gold,
Well, that's where the whole symbolism thing comes in.
Okay.
These alchemists, They weren't always talking about literal stuff. Gold wasn't just gold. It represented something deeper.
Like what?
Spiritual enlightenment, maybe? Or maybe something else entirely. And the process of, transforming these base metals into gold,
Yeah.
that was symbolic too. It represented this process of inner transformation, personal growth.
So it was more about like self-discovery than actual wealth.
Exactly. And this idea of transformation through knowledge, through understanding these like hidden principles of the universe, it pops up again and again in a lot of esoteric traditions.
Interesting.
It's like they believe that if we could unlock the secrets of the cosmos, well, we could unlock our own hidden potential too.
It's funny, we've been talking about all these things that on the surface seem kind of out there. Secret societies, psychic phenomena, alchemy. But the more we dig into it, the more I see how it all connects back to these very basic human desires.
Oh, totally. Like what?
The desire for meaning, for purpose, for some kind of control over our lives,
Absolutely. And maybe, just maybe, these ancient traditions with all their myths and symbols and rituals, maybe that was their way of trying to deal with those same desires. Remember that book, A Short History of Everything?
Oh, yeah. That one took us on a wild ride.
Totally different version of history, right?
Like, they had their own interpretation of, well, everything based on these archetypal forces they saw at play in the world. It's almost like they saw history as this, like, grand cosmic play unfolding according to some kind of plan.
Exactly. And while some of it might seem, I don't know, a little out there,
A little bit.
the video encourages us to at least consider the possibility that there might be some deeper truths hidden within these myths. Remember that whole bit about Saturn killing the mother goddess?
And the angels, right.
Angels breeding with humans to, like, spark consciousness? Wild stuff.
Yeah, those parts were pretty wild. But we're not supposed to take those stories literally, right?
Right. It's about seeing them as symbolic. They're representations of these, like, key turning points in human evolution.
Okay, I see what you mean.
It's like they were trying to make sense of these huge shifts in human consciousness, but through narrative, through storytelling,
No.
through myth.
So instead of just, dry facts and figures and all that,
Right.
we get these really powerful stories, these myths that try to grapple with these big, complex ideas. Take the cognitive revolution, for example.
That was a big one.
That period, what was it, 70,000 years ago,
Something like that.
when humans suddenly started developing language, art, more complex social structures.
It's like our brains got a massive upgrade.
Totally. And from a purely scientific perspective, yeah, something big definitely happened.
Sure.
But I imagine for those actually living through it, it must have felt like leaving some kind of Garden of Eden. Suddenly they had to grapple with ideas like death, morality, maybe even the divine, heavy stuff.
Definitely not easy questions to answer.
And these myths, these stories about gods and goddesses and all these supernatural beings, maybe that was their way of trying to explain those things, to find some kind of meaning in a world that suddenly became a lot more complicated.
Makes sense, right?
It does. And the video suggests that these, like, archetypal stories, they don't just explain the past, they also give us insights into the present.
I like that.
Remember that part about Mother Nature as an archetype?
Oh, yeah. Good one.
It's all about duality, isn't it? Nature is beautiful, yeah, but it can also be terrifying, nurturing, but also incredibly destructive.
We see that throughout history, for sure.
We see it in ourselves, too. Those same opposing forces, they're within all of us. And these archetypes, these universal patterns, well, they can help us understand ourselves, I think, our place in the grand scheme of things.
I'm with you on that.
Speaking of understanding our place in it all, the video also talked about that great chain of being. You remember that? This whole hierarchy of existence with, like, God at the top and then everything else flowing down from there.
Yes.
And while that whole hierarchy thing, it might seem a little outdated now, but the idea that there are different levels of complexity and awareness in the universe, that's pretty interesting, don't you think?
It is, actually. And it's not so much about, these literal rankings. It's more about recognizing the interconnectedness of everything.
How so?
Well, what happens on one level, it can influence what happens on another.
It's like that butterfly effect thing, right? Butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil and then bam, tornado in Texas.
Exactly. Or think about it in terms of those alchemists again. They believed that they could actually impact the material world through their spiritual practices.
Really?
Yeah. It's this whole idea that reality might be far more fluid, far more interconnected than we usually give it credit for.
So where does that leave us? We started with these ancient forbidden teachings, explored the limits of how we understand things now, considered like the allure and also the potential dangers of secret knowledge. We even touched on the possibility of a reality that's, well, a lot stranger and more interconnected than we usually imagine.
It's a lot to process for sure.
It really is. But that's kind of the beauty of it, isn't it? I mean, we're left with more questions than answers and a like thirst to explore even further.
And maybe that's the whole point.
You think so?
Yeah, maybe the true value of a deep dive like this isn't about like finding all the answers. It's about asking better questions,
I like that.
challenging our assumptions, expanding our sense of what's actually possible.
Beautifully said. And who knows what other rabbit holes we'll be diving into next time. Until then, keep those minds open, folks, and never stop questioning.
I would have been on top of the charts, but it's politics. You do some gimmick shit and post, you get a lot of clicks. Drop some real shit and they probably won't acknowledge it.